Hebrews chapter 12, verse 14 through 15, it says, "Make every effort to live at peace with everyone and to be holy." And then verse 15 says it like this: "See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many." Now, I found that very interesting as we were in this series talking about some of the messes in our lives that we need to address, some of the things that we need to clean up. The truth of the matter is that there's a lot of moments in our lives where people do things that are offensive, and in fact, it feels like we live in a world where everyone's offended all the time by everything. And frankly, I just don't have enough time in my life to be offended all the time. I've got more important things to do for the kingdom and for my family and for my contentment and my joy than to live in a constant state of offense. What you have and the calling that God has for your life and your life itself is too important for you to constantly live in a state of offense. And so what I really want to challenge you with today is this idea of, like, there's gonna be moments in your life where you get your feelings hurt, or people do things that are upsetting, or that you don't think they should be that way. And I really want to challenge you to not give power to people over your life more than you absolutely need to. I can't control what people are going to do, but I always have the ability to control how I respond. And I don't just mean like lashing out, but I mean like how much space I give that energy or that time or that focus to. And again, I think this stuff happens all the time. It happens and sometimes it's in like weird ways. Sometimes it's like, there's that guy who there's the company potluck is this Friday, and he always comes with like a bag of chips, but he's the first one to get in line and grabs the ribs, and so you're offended by it. Maybe he just doesn't have enough money to buy anything more than chips, and he really, really likes ribs. It is what it is. Is it the right thing to do? Is it a good thing to do? No, but I don't really need to be that offended by it. I don't really need to let it bother me that much. Or there's that person who you've been liking all their photos, and you've noticed that they stopped liking your photos, and you're wondering what's going on. And so you go to their page and you look at it and you find out that they're not following you anymore, and you're offended because you thought that you had this follow back sort of mentality, friendship, relationship, and now they've stopped following you and you're offended by it. Or maybe somebody's bumper sticker or flag that they have flying outside of their house, or who they voted for, or their take on some political context gets you frustrated. And so instead of feeling that and moving past it, we live in this constant state of offense. And the problem with this constant state of offense is it leads to bitterness. And despite its name, bitterness, it's supposed to be bitter. It seems like we just eat that stuff up, man. Like, it seems like we really like to be offended anymore. It seems like we really like bitterness, that we've acquired a taste for it. I remember the first time that I drank black coffee. I was a little guy. I mean, Grandpa gave me a cup of black coffee, and it was bitter. But I really wanted to Grandpa to see me as an equal, and so I chucked it, choked it down. And then, the more I drank it, the more I became accustomed to its taste, and the bitterness now is something that I look forward to. So let's use that metaphor for the rest of our lives when it comes to emotional and spiritual bitterness. Sure, you've been hurt. Sure, you've been let down. Sure, you've been offended. Sure, people have done you wrong. Sure, they've not done the things that they should have done. But some of us are so accustomed to that bitterness that we long for it, the drama and the trauma and the pain that comes with it. And you're like, oh, come on. Now, and only you can answer this question about yourself. But like, if undealt with, bitterness will grow roots that will go deep, and those roots are invasive. They will bust up the foundation of the home that you're building. They will work their way into the pipes, and they will cause so much damage in your life that you won't be able to recover. And so you have to deal with the root of bitterness. Bitterness is dangerous at its very root. And the truth of the matter is that in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 15, this is what we see the author say. He says, the bitter root grows and causes trouble. And, the truth of the matter is that the location and the health of the root system is indicative to the fruit that is produced. And so if the roots are bitter, then the fruit will be bitter. In other words, if we don't get to the root of the problem of our bitterness, then all our lives will produce is bitter fruit or poisonous fruit. Hebrews 15 says that it causes many problems. It defiles many. It's that poisonous fruit that defiles many. Fruit's always affected by the quality of the roots. And so, how do you kill the root of bitterness? Well, let me show you in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 31 and 32. He says, this is Paul talking to the church at Ephesus. He says, get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, brawling, slander, along with every form of malice. Okay, so he says, okay, do that. Yeah, but how? Like, wouldn't that be nice? And then he gives them the answer in verse 32. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other just as Christ God forgave you. And so the way that you combat bitterness is with compassion. And so think about this. Compassion is to care about or come along someone else and to attempt to have a passionate care or love or strategy for caring for them as you come alongside of them. This is the concept or the idea of compassion. And so in Ephesians 4:32, when he says be kind and compassionate to one another, Romans talks about it too, though. It says don't overcome evil with evil. You can overcome evil with good. Luke chapter 6 verse 28 says bless those that curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. And so when you're talking about killing bitterness with compassion, sometimes it's difficult to be compassionate towards the people who have hurt you, who have wronged you. This is why I want you to practice compassion. This is why we do missions. This is why we do outreach. This is why we're in home groups and have house churches, is so that we can have forums and places and spaces where we practice compassion. The more you practice compassion, the more the roots of compassion grow down in your life, and then you produce fruit that is compassionate. And so maybe it's difficult for you to have compassion towards your mother-in-law or your boss who's not a very good person, or your coworker who's always leaving you hanging, or your sibling who's done you wrong, or your attacker, or whatever that is. Like, what does that look like? I don't know what that looks like, but I do know this, that when you practice compassion kicks bitterness's butt every single time. And that the roots of compassion can only grow when you tend to that soil, when you're intentional about the things that you do and the places that you go. And so if you want to get rid of the root of bitterness, yes, it's about kindness and compassion. But if you keep reading in that same verse, verses 31 and 32, he says, get rid of bitterness, be kind and compassionate. And then he says, forgiving each other, just as Christ forgave you. The way you kill bitterness is not just with compassion, but it's also with forgiveness. Now, this is a hard one for us, because while we enjoy the gift of forgiveness, we are called to be forgiving. In Romans 12:18, it says, as if it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. And Ephesians 4:32 says, be kind and compassionate, forgiving each other just as Christ forgave you. And so it's this idea of striving for kindness and compassion. And compassion maybe is the easier of the two, and forgiveness might be super difficult because, well, Pastor, you don't know how bad they hurt me, or you don't know the whole story, or you don't know what they've wronged me. And you're right, I don't know your story, and I don't know who hurt you, and I don't know how you got here and you're at this place in your life right now. But here's what I know, that when someone's done you wrong and you hold on to unforgiveness and allow it to grow into the root of bitterness, then what happens is that you are the one who is diseased and afflicted and is producing poisonous fruit, and yet they're merrily going about their way. They get to be free from the repercussions and the problems, and because you haven't let them go. Forgiveness of someone who's wronged you or has done you wrong isn't about them, it's about you. When you let them go, right, you're not freeing them from the prison, you're freeing yourself from the prison of unforgiveness. And unforgiveness will keep you trapped in the past and hurting and broken. and you don't want that. It'll keep you from being compassionate, and it'll allow you to live a life that is very bitter and harsh. And so instead of just becoming accustomed to the bitterness, this is my life now, that you could have an abundant life, you could have a sweet life, you could have a life full of compassion and joy and kindness and second chances and new beginnings. But to do that, we have to start with forgiving. We have to start with being compassionate. The only way to address the bitterness, to address the mess, is to do the opposite. And so I want you to exercise those muscles of compassion and forgiveness in as many areas of your life that you possibly can right now. And start with the little stuff. I mean, like, you don't have to run a marathon tomorrow. Just go out for a jog, right? Start with the little stuff. Start with something that you can accomplish, that you can actually do. Like letting go of some of the resentment and some of the frustration and some of the pain from your past, and let it be replaced with God's loving kindness. And as you express compassion to other people, you'd be surprised how it brings you joy. And if you're not ready to be compassionate towards those who have hurt you and wronged you, then be compassionate towards total strangers and practice compassion. Once you've learned to practice compassion, then you'll have the strength to do it for those who have actually wronged you. In fact, I want to wrap up our time together today and with this idea of, like, we're asking God's guidance and we're asking for him to release us from bitterness so that we can, kind of get down to the root. And I'm reminded of a time in my childhood when I was at my grandparents' for a summer, and Grandpa asked me if I would help him pull some weeds, and I said sure. And I was a little reluctant at first. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do yard work. But I said sure because it's Grandpa, and I was pulling the weeds, and I was just kind of snapping them off at the ground level. And he says, no, Eric, you got to get to the very root. You got to pull it out all the way by the roots. And if you don't, they'll grow back. And so, I learned, I didn't really believe him when I was at that age, but learning that getting to the very root of the problem, and for some of us, the bitterness that's dug down into the roots is so invasive that it's going to take a lot of excavation to get to it. But the best way to do that is through compassion and forgiveness. And allow God's love to shine through your compassionate acts. Allow God's love to shine through you forgiving others as Christ has forgave you. And he didn't ask anything of you except for you to do in turn what he's done for you. Model me, live as I live. Paul said it like that, follow me as I follow Christ. And so as we journey together to be more compassionate, as we practice forgiveness, the Lord will do a work inside of your life, and you'll begin to develop healthy roots that will produce healthy fruit. And it all starts with you and I being compassionate and forgiveness.